She pressed her hand against his trembling arm, whispering, "You don't have to face the dark alone." And in that fragile moment, blinded by betrayal and fear, Jameson felt a spark of trust, and a love he never expected. This love story is another intriguing story you will love. Sit back and enjoy. Jameson sat alone in the vast silent expanse of his penthouse, the city lights spilling like fractured stars through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The glow reflected off his polished mahogany desk, highlighting the glass of untouched whiskey that had sat there for hours. The silence wasn't comforting, it was suffocating. Blind for nearly a year after the accident, he had learned to navigate the world without sight, yet every familiar sound, every echo of his own footsteps, reminded him of the emptiness in his life. Betrayal had a voice louder than sight, and Vanessa's laughter still haunted him in quiet moments. His hands hovered over the keyboard of his laptop, reading Braille emails and business reports with meticulous precision, but each message felt hollow. Every decision he made, every deal he closed, could not fill the void she had left. The fiancée he had loved with unwavering certainty had chosen deceit over devotion, her betrayal cutting deeper than his blindness ever could. Jameson had once believed wealth could shield him from pain, but wealth had no answer to heartbreak, no remedy for trust shattered. A soft knock at the door startled him, and he tensed instinctively. "Who is it?" His voice was steady but brittle. "It's Renee. I brought the documents you requested," came the gentle reply. There was a warmth in her tone, a subtle steadiness that made him hesitate. He didn't know why the sound unsettled him. Maybe it was the way her voice seemed to slip past the walls he had built, touching the part of him that still longed for connection. Renee, on the other side of the city, was just stepping into the quiet hum of her own apartment. The sun had just dipped below the skyline, casting golden light on the scattered piles of books and sketches that filled her living space. She ran her fingers over the faded wood of her drafting table, pausing to inhale the faint scent of ink and paper. Each object reminded her of simpler, quieter ambitions, dreams she had once pursued with abandon, now shelved to navigate a world that demanded practicality. She had been Vanessa's friend for years, often the quiet witness to the drama of wealth, love, and betrayal that surrounded her social circle. But Renee had never been content with standing in the background. She valued authenticity over appearances, empathy over strategy, and had learned, sometimes painfully, that love required courage she wasn't always ready to summon. Tonight, she felt that tug, the magnetic pull of someone in pain. She couldn't explain why, but something about Jameson's solitude called to her instinctively. Perhaps it was the whispers she had heard of the man's tragic accident, the fiancée's betrayal, the heartbreak that had left him withdrawn. Perhaps it was a desire she couldn't name yet, to reach someone lost in darkness and remind them that the world still held light. Back in the penthouse, Jameson ran his fingers over the sleek surface of the desk, imagining Renee's presence before she had even entered. The sound of her footsteps was soft but deliberate, measured. She did not intrude, yet she filled the space with a subtle insistence, as if her very being demanded acknowledgement. He bristled at the thought. He had learned to avoid emotional entanglement, but couldn't entirely suppress the curiosity stirring in him. When she stepped inside, her hand instinctively reached out, brushing against his arm to guide the documents into place. The contact was brief, polite, yet it sent a shiver through him he hadn't felt in months. His mind recoiled. This was inappropriate, dangerous even, but a small part of him, the part that still remembered what trust felt like, leaned toward the warmth she offered. Renee's eyes flicked over the penthouse, taking in the faint dust on the shelves, the untouched photographs, the sterile perfection of his life. She noted the subtle loneliness etched in every line of his posture, the tense curl of his fingers over the keyboard. Something about his silence was not absence but restraint, a carefully guarded sorrow. And in that quiet observation, she felt her own chest tighten. It was impossible, irrational even, but she wanted to reach across the chasm of pain and offer him something he had forgotten, a reason to hope. Jameson broke the silence first. You didn't have to come." The words were clipped, defensive, yet underneath them lingered a tremor of relief. "I know," Renee replied softly. "But sometimes people need someone to notice the quiet, even if it's just for a moment." She didn't wait for permission to linger. She placed the folder on the desk, fingers brushing his lightly again, and offered a small tentative smile. A flicker of something unrecognizable passed through him. Trust? Curiosity? The faintest spark of hope. He did not respond, but he did not pull away. The city outside carried on oblivious, neon lights flickering against the dark glass, as two people who had lived entire lives in parallel, unaware of the other's existence, now shared the same space. The air between them was charged, heavy with unspoken questions. Could love emerge from betrayal? Could one find light in darkness? For Renee, it was a whisper of destiny. For Jameson, it was the first crack in a fortress built from fear, pride, and heartbreak. Neither fully understood what was coming, but both felt the subtle, undeniable shift. And in the quiet tension, the story began. Have you ever trusted someone who hurt you deeply, only to find hope in the unlikeliest place? Comment what you would do if love appeared after betrayal. The morning sun filtered weakly through the penthouse blinds, casting slatted shadows across the room. Jameson moved slowly, guided by memory and the subtle click of his own footsteps on the polished floor. His heart carried the familiar ache of loss, a heavy weight he had accepted as permanent. Vanessa's betrayal lingered like a shadow he could not escape. The cruel whisper of lies, the flicker of her false smiles, the laughter that had once promised forever. Then the call came. A message, sharp and unexpected. Vanessa had been seen at a private gala in the city, arm in arm with someone he had once considered a rival in business. The revelation hit him like a physical blow. He sank into the leather chair, gripping the arms as though holding himself together could stave off the storm inside. Every pulse in his head echoed the betrayal anew, mixing rage, grief, and disbelief. He had loved her without reservation, and yet she had torn the trust from him like a skilled thief. Renee arrived at the penthouse with the usual soft knock, unaware that the day's revelation had already set his emotions on fire. She carried her usual calm, but sensed the tension in the air immediately. Jameson's normally measured voice was strained, sharp at first, then breaking into fragments of unspoken torment. She was with him, he asked, the words brittle. How long has this been going on? His hands trembled slightly, brushing against the empty glass on the desk. Renee hesitated, the air between them thickening. I don't know the full story, she said softly. But I can see it hurts you. Her voice was steady, a gentle anchor in a storm of confusion and pain. Jameson laughed, a hollow sound that made Renee flinch. Hurt me? Hurt me? Renee, she lied to me for months, for years, and I never saw it. His voice cracked. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. I was blind, in more ways than one. Renee's hand hovered, unsure whether to touch him. Finally, she rested it lightly on his arm, an almost imperceptible gesture that spoke louder than any words. You're not alone, she whispered. You don't have to face this alone. The words, simple as they were, struck him differently. For the first time since the betrayal, Jameson felt the faintest flicker of clarity, an awareness that perhaps someone else could understand, could offer comfort without judgment. But the fire of anger and heartbreak remained, coiled tightly around his chest. Later that day, Jameson wandered to the balcony, the city sprawling endlessly beneath him. The noise, the movement, the life he could no longer see, they all felt distant, irrelevant. Renee followed, silent, sensing the weight pressing down on him. You loved her, she said quietly, not as accusation, but acknowledgement. I thought I did, Jameson admitted, voice hoarse. I thought she was everything. And now there's nothing. Only the echo of what I believed in. His fingers drummed against the balcony railing, seeking something solid, tangible, real. Renee remained a step behind, letting him speak, letting the raw vulnerability fill the space. It's not nothing, she said gently. Not if you let it be a lesson. Not if you allow yourself to feel what's left, even if it's hard. He turned toward her, the first real gaze in months, eyes unseeing but intent. And you, what are you doing here? Why do you care? Her lips curved in a faint, wistful smile. Because someone has to, she said. And maybe, because I see you, even the parts you don't want anyone to see. Jameson's chest tightened. It was impossible to explain why her words affected him so profoundly. He had been surrounded by people his whole life, advisors, friends, acquaintances, but none had pierced the armor he had built around his heart. Yet here was Renee, gentle and unwavering, speaking truths he hadn't dared to acknowledge himself. Hours passed in quiet tension, the two of them suspended between grief and unspoken possibility. Every movement, her hand adjusting the papers, his fingers brushing against the railing, the soft sighs they could not contain, felt loaded with subtext. It was a slow-burning recognition that something fundamental had shifted. And then, in the stillness, it happened. Renee reached for his hand. Not a touch of obligation, not a gesture of pity, but an intentional, deliberate contact that demanded attention. Jameson felt it immediately, a jolt of something he had not felt in months. It was hope, faint but undeniable, warmth, fragile but insistent, and most dangerously, the stirrings of love he had thought impossible in the wake of betrayal. He froze, the weight of past pain pressing down, but could not withdraw. In that brief, suspended moment, he realized something he hadn't allowed himself to think. Perhaps love could arrive again, quietly, unexpectedly, and through someone entirely unanticipated. The day ended with no dramatic declarations, no resolutions, only the lingering echo of a hand held, a promise unspoken, and the faintest spark of possibility. And yet, it was enough to make Jameson realize that the journey forward would be far more complex than anger or revenge. This spark, delicate as it was, might just guide him out of darkness. Jameson awoke to silence that felt heavier than the night before. The penthouse, once just a luxurious shell, now seemed to press against him with the weight of every unresolved feeling. He flexed his hands against the bedspread, a nervous rhythm he had adopted since losing his sight, trying to anchor himself in something real. The memory of Renee's touch from the day prior lingered like fire against his skin, impossible to shake, yet impossible to fully embrace. He told himself it was foolishness, an intrusion into his life he could neither control nor define. She was Vanessa's friend. She had no claim on his heart. And yet, the echo of her presence tugged at him, a constant reminder of warmth he hadn't allowed himself to feel in months. Anger and longing warred within him, each emotion a barrier to trust, each heartbeat a rebellion against vulnerability. Renee, meanwhile, navigated her own internal conflict. She had seen the raw fissures in Jameson's heart, the shadows cast by betrayal and blindness, and she had been drawn in despite herself. She knew she was stepping into dangerous territory, emotionally, socially, ethically. He was the man everyone envied, yet trapped by grief she could neither remedy nor fully comprehend. And yet the quiet moments, the small gestures, the unspoken understanding, had ignited something in her, a cautious hope she couldn't dismiss. That afternoon, a miscommunication intensified the tension. Jameson's assistant delivered a message about Vanessa, suggesting that she had attempted to reconcile, or perhaps manipulate him further. Fury rose in him like a storm he couldn't control. "She's here to humiliate me," he muttered aloud, fingers pressing against the armrest until they ached. He imagined Renee witnessing this outburst, her compassion confronting his volatility, and recoiled at the thought. He could not allow anyone in, especially not someone so close to the source of his pain, to see him unravel. Renee arrived later, portfolio in hand, unaware of his inner turmoil. She entered with her usual gentleness, but immediately sensed the defensive walls he had raised. "Jameson," she said softly, stepping cautiously into the room. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," he snapped, the words sharper than intended. Silence followed, pregnant with the weight of unspoken truths. Renee did not retreat, though her eyes reflected the tension she felt. She knew better than to force him into vulnerability, yet the distance he maintained was painful. "You don't have to do this alone," she tried again, voice calm but firm. He shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping. "Alone is all I know," he said. "Alone is safer." "You don't understand," his voice faltered, the mask of pride slipping for a brief second, then snapping back. "You can't understand." Renee stayed, absorbing the words like stones against her chest. Her own desire to comfort him wavered with doubt. Perhaps she had misread the spark from the previous day. Perhaps he was incapable of letting anyone in. Yet the small fleeting glances, the brief hesitations in his tone, betrayed a longing he refused to acknowledge. Over the next few days, they fell into a careful, unspoken dance. Jameson oscillated between inviting conversation and retreating into silence. Renee offered help, subtly and without pressure, only to be met with reluctance. Every smile she gave, every gesture of kindness, was both balm and challenge, exposing the raw edges of his heart. One evening, Renee arrived with a handwritten note of encouragement, hoping it might reach him where words had failed. She placed it on the desk and stepped back. Later, Jameson found it, fingers trembling as he traced the elegant script. The words, "Even in darkness, light finds a way," stirred something within him, yet pride and fear whispered for him to discard it. He folded the paper neatly and hid it in his drawer. The sentiment was tempting, dangerous even, and he could not allow himself the vulnerability it demanded. The tension escalated further when Vanessa attempted direct contact. A message appeared on his phone, dripping with apology and manipulation, and Jameson's walls solidified instantly. No, he whispered to himself. Never again. He felt relief in his self-imposed isolation, yet also a pang of emptiness. He had convinced himself that shutting the world out was safer than risking betrayal, but the memory of Renee's presence, her calm strength, lingered like a persistent shadow. Renee, sensing his withdrawal, did not push. Instead, she focused on her work, subtly integrating herself into his life without forcing intimacy. Her patience was a quiet resistance to his resistance. Each act of support, adjusting a pen, arranging a folder, listening without judgment, was her way of demonstrating that connection did not always require declaration. The emotional spark between them burned quietly beneath the surface, pulsing with unacknowledged desire and fear. Jameson's pride and grief fought every urge to lean into it, while Renee's empathy wrestled with her own cautious hope. Both were prisoners of circumstance, his blindness, his betrayal, her position as Vanessa's friend, but the tension created a magnetic pull neither could deny. By the end of the week, the unspoken resistance reached a fragile equilibrium. Jameson had not opened his heart fully, yet he no longer shut it entirely. Renee remained a careful presence in his life, offering warmth without demanding reciprocation. They were both aware of the potential between them, yet equally aware of the risk. And as the city lights flickered against the penthouse windows once more, both felt the quiet, undeniable truth. Resistance could delay connection, but it could not extinguish it. The emotional spark from their first encounter lingered, waiting for circumstances to allow it to ignite fully. Have you ever held back from someone you cared about, even when the spark was undeniable? Share your thoughts below. What would you risk for love? The rain fell in heavy sheets over the city, a relentless percussion against the penthouse windows. The streets glistened with reflections of neon signs and taillights, creating a chaotic, flickering mosaic. Jameson had intended to stay inside, cocooned in the safety of solitude, but an urgent business call demanded his presence at the office downtown. He hesitated at the sound of the storm, aware that his blindness made such trips perilous, yet pride insisted he maintain control over his life. Renee, he called out, voice clipped but tinged with unease. I need you to come. I can't navigate this alone today. Renee looked up from her notes, her brow furrowed. She had sensed he would reach the point of practical vulnerability, even if he wouldn't admit emotional need. I'll get an umbrella, she said, grabbing her coat and adjusting her scarf. Her calm certainty was a stark contrast to the storm outside, both literal and metaphorical. By the time they reached the lobby, the rain was pounding in sheets. Jameson's cane tapped uncertainly on the marble floor as he moved toward the elevator. Renee's hand was there before he could protest, steadying his arm. The contact was gentle but firm, an unspoken declaration, you are not alone. He stiffened, resisting the reassurance, yet allowed himself to lean slightly into her guidance. The streets were a river of motion, cars splashing through puddles, umbrellas snapping open and closed like mechanical flowers. Renee kept him centered, her voice low and descriptive. There's a taxi ahead on the left. Wait, turn slightly. Careful, the curb is higher here. Her instructions were precise but infused with care, a rhythm that grounded him amidst chaos. Jameson's pride wrestled with gratitude. He wanted to refuse, to insist that he could handle the world on his own. Yet every cautious step taken with Renee by his side reminded him how long he had been living behind walls of fear. Her presence was not invasive, it was protective, attentive, and steady. He realized that trust could be rebuilt not with grand gestures, but with small, deliberate acts. Inside the taxi, the space was cramped, the rain pelting the roof in erratic beats. Renee's hand remained lightly on his as the car swerved through the storm. You're safe, she said softly. The words were simple, but they penetrated his armor, stirring emotions he had tried to suppress. At the office, the storm had caused power outages, elevators stuck, and employees stranded. Jameson found himself and Renee among a handful of staff huddled in a dimly lit conference room. The flickering emergency lights cast long shadows on the walls, exaggerating shapes and movements. It was claustrophobic, yet intimate, a forced proximity that neither could escape. Renee moved to help distribute flashlights and organize people into safe spaces. Jameson remained seated, silent at first, but eventually allowed her guidance. Their interactions were careful, deliberate, and filled with subtle tension. Every glance, every touch, resonated with unspoken feelings. The storm outside mirrored the turbulence within, creating a crucible that exposed both fear and longing. Hours passed, the storm showing no signs of relenting. Conversations dwindled as the employees settled, leaving only Jameson and Renee in the flickering light. He broke the silence, voice low but direct. "Why do you stay?" She paused, considering her answer. "Because someone has to," she replied. "Because sometimes, people need a reminder that someone cares. And maybe because I can't ignore you, not completely." Her honesty struck him with unexpected force. Pride whispered to turn away, to retreat, but another part, a part he had not yet named, leaned in. The shared vulnerability, the physical closeness, the storm forcing them together, it all chipped away at the walls he had built around his heart. For the first time in weeks, Jameson laughed quietly, a soft, almost startled sound. Renee looked at him, surprised, and allowed herself a faint smile. It was fragile, ephemeral, yet in that moment, a bridge began forming, a connection built not on grand declarations, but on the intimacy of shared circumstance. As the storm continued its relentless descent, they found themselves lingering near the same emergency lantern, their hands brushing repeatedly as they adjusted papers and assisted stranded colleagues. Each contact was electric, subtle but undeniable, a silent acknowledgement of something neither dared name aloud. The forced proximity had begun to dissolve resistance, revealing the first hints of trust and attraction. By the time the power was restored and the city streets were no longer rivers of water and chaos, Jameson and Renee were no longer merely allies navigating a storm. They were two souls tentatively testing the possibility of connection. The physical closeness had cracked the emotional distance. For the first time, Jameson allowed himself to imagine a future in which darkness did not always rule. And as they exited the building into the fresh post-storm air, the faint scent of rain mingling with the city's concrete tang, both recognized silently that the storm had not just passed outside, it had forced an awakening within. The next morning dawned pale and quiet, a fragile sunlight filtering through the penthouse blinds. Jameson moved with his habitual precision, yet there was an unease he couldn't shake. The storm from the night before had left an imprint, not just on the city streets, but on the fragile bridge forming between him and Renee. He knew the path forward would demand more than cautious steps. It would demand confronting the past he had long buried. Renee arrived with her usual calm, a stack of papers under one arm, but there was a tension she could not hide. She had uncovered something in Jameson's office while organizing files, a photograph, slightly bent at the edges, depicting a smiling woman who could only be Vanessa. She hadn't meant to intrude, yet curiosity and a quiet compulsion to understand him drew her closer. "Jameson," she began softly, holding up the photo without a trace of judgment, "can we talk?" He froze, fingers brushing the desk instinctively, sensing the shift in tone. "About what?" he asked, voice tight, guarded. She placed the photograph gently on the desk. "About her. About what happened between you and Vanessa." Her eyes met his, calm but unwavering. "I want to understand, not to judge, but to help." Jameson's jaw tightened. The photo, with its faint crease, was a relic of the trust he had given and the betrayal he had endured. "There's nothing to understand," he said, voice brittle. "I loved her. I believed in her. And she broke everything." Renee leaned slightly closer, careful not to intrude physically. "I know betrayal cuts deep," she said quietly. "I've seen it happen to people I care about, and it leaves marks that aren't always visible. You're not just blind in your eyes, Jameson. You've been blind to the truth about people you let in." Her words struck him with uncomfortable accuracy. He had built walls, yet even walls could be breached. He inhaled sharply, the memory of her touch from the storm rising unbidden, and allowed a tremor of vulnerability to slip through. I don't know if I can trust anyone again," he admitted. Renee nodded, understanding without pressing. "Trust isn't something that comes all at once," she said. "It's a series of moments, small and deliberate. You've taken steps already, even if you don't see them yet." There was a pause, pregnant with meaning. Jameson's mind drifted to the years before the accident, before Vanessa's deception, moments of light and laughter, ambitions and pride, all overshadowed by the betrayal that had followed. Renee's calm presence was a counterpoint to the chaos of memory, offering a chance to confront pain instead of running from it. In return, Renee allowed a crack in her own armor. She revealed glimpses of her past, a childhood marked by quiet longing for recognition, a youth spent supporting friends while her own dreams were sidelined. She told Jameson of a failed opportunity to study art abroad, a risk never taken, a life partially deferred for practicality and loyalty. The admission was brief, almost whispered, but it shifted the space between them. Vulnerability was contagious. Jameson listened, absorbing her story, sensing the courage it took for her to share. He felt a kinship he had not anticipated, a recognition that strength was not measured by invulnerability, but by the willingness to show cracks. For the first time, he saw Renee not merely as Vanessa's friend, but as someone resilient, authentic, and profoundly human. Then came a revelation that neither expected. While handling some old files, Renee found a letter addressed to Jameson from Vanessa, one he had overlooked in his initial heartbreak. It was a confession, laced with regret and manipulation, admitting infidelity and the elaborate web she had spun. Jameson read it aloud, voice trembling with a mix of fury and sorrow. "I never should have done this. I was selfish, blind, and cowardly. You deserved better than me." Renee placed her hand gently over his as he folded the letter, grounding him. "You see," she said softly, "you survived this. You're still here, and you're still capable of love. The past doesn't have to define the future." The intensity of the moment, the unearthing of betrayal, the sharing of vulnerabilities, the quiet insistence of connection, brought them closer. Physical proximity was no longer accidental. Their hands lingered, brushing lightly, and Jameson allowed the contact, no longer resisting the spark that had been growing since the storm. Later, as they shared a quiet dinner in the penthouse kitchen, laughter emerged, a rare, genuine sound that both startled and delighted them. Renee recounted a humorous childhood anecdote, and Jameson, for the first time in months, allowed himself to be fully present, the weight of grief temporarily lifted. By the end of the evening, a fragile bond had been forged. Both had revealed pieces of themselves, both had faced remnants of the past, and both had discovered that the path forward, uncertain and delicate, was worth exploring together. The stage was set for emotional bonding. The first barriers had fallen. And although fear and pride lingered, the unspoken promise was clear: something profound was developing between them, fragile yet undeniable. Evenings in the penthouse had taken on a new rhythm. Rain had cleared, leaving the city washed in golden streetlights, reflections dancing against the windows. Jameson and Renee found themselves lingering together long after work was done, sharing quiet dinners, tea, or simply the company of another human being. Silence no longer felt suffocating, it became a shared comfort. One evening, Renee brought a small box of old photographs she had discovered while organizing some of Jameson's files. "I found these," she said softly, handing him the worn edges. "I thought you might want to see them, or not. It's your choice." Jameson ran his fingers lightly over the pictures, recalling the faces, the memories, and the fragments of a life that had been bright before darkness fell. Renee watched him, noticing the tension in his hands ease as he whispered names and dates, remembering laughter and fleeting joys. She offered commentary only when he welcomed it, her presence a quiet encouragement rather than an intrusion. "You remember this?" she asked, holding up a photo of a younger Jameson carefree, laughing with friends at a gala he barely recalled attending. He chuckled softly, a sound that felt new in the space. "I had forgotten." "Thank you," he said, voice laced with genuine gratitude. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel human, to feel connection. The ice around his heart softened fractionally, responding to the patience and warmth Renee offered. Later, they moved to the balcony, the city below humming softly. The air was scented with a faint perfume of rain-soaked asphalt and jasmine from a nearby rooftop garden. Renee leaned against the railing, letting her hair catch the breeze. "I like seeing you like this," she said, quietly. "Not the businessman, not the billionaire, just Jameson." He shifted slightly, considering her words. Vulnerability had always felt like a risk, yet with Renee, it felt safe. Tentative trust began to replace the defensiveness that had ruled him for months. "I'm not sure I know who that is anymore," he admitted, voice low, tinged with curiosity and something else, hope. Over the next few days, moments of levity began to infiltrate their interactions. Renee would make him laugh with absurd little anecdotes, recounting childhood misadventures or amusing office mishaps. Jameson, who had been weighed down by pride and bitterness, found himself responding with genuine humor, teasing her gently in ways he hadn't allowed in months. One evening, after a particularly tense board meeting, Renee guided him back to the penthouse. He was exhausted, yet when he stepped inside, the warm lighting and faint scent of jasmine seemed to wrap around him like a soft blanket. She offered him a cup of tea, and they sat together on the sofa, knees brushing accidentally, both pretending it was inconsequential. "You know," Renee said, stirring her cup, "sometimes the smallest gestures matter the most. A cup of tea, a warm blanket, a shared silence. It's not grand, but it's real." Jameson's hand brushed hers unintentionally, and neither moved it away. The moment was electric, simple yet profound. "Real," he echoed softly. I forgot what that felt like." A subtle shift occurred between them, laughter, gentle teasing, shared memories, small acts of care, all building toward a foundation stronger than pride or fear. Each touch, glance, and shared silence became a testament to the trust they were cultivating, delicate yet undeniable. That night, as Renee prepared to leave, Jameson's hand caught hers. "Stay a little longer," he murmured. The request was uncharacteristic, vulnerable, and entirely sincere. Renee's heart fluttered. "I will," she replied, a faint smile crossing her face. And in that simple agreement, a fragile intimacy was cemented. By the end of the week, the emotional bond between them had solidified into something tangible. Jameson had begun to let go of some of the bitterness and fear that had dominated his heart, while Renee had embraced the possibility of love, despite the risks inherent in stepping so close to someone so deeply wounded. They laughed, teased, and shared silence. They were beginning to understand each other in ways words alone could not convey. The spark that had been lit during the storm, the unspoken attraction, the subtle electricity of touch, was now a steady flame. And as the city lights reflected in the windows, casting a warm glow over them, both realized connection had found a way to grow, quietly but persistently, in the space between trust and vulnerability. The morning air was crisp, but inside the penthouse, tension crackled like static electricity. Jameson had barely slept. His mind replayed fragments of Vanessa's message from a previous week, a subtle threat, insinuations about business dealings, and the faint suggestion that she would not relinquish control over any part of his life without a fight. He had tried to ignore it, tried to focus on Renee and the fragile connection they had cultivated, but doubt gnawed at him, a relentless companion. Renee arrived as usual, bright and composed, but Jameson's mood was icy, his patience frayed. "We need to talk," he said curtly, voice sharp. She hesitated, sensing the storm within him before the words had even landed. "What is it?" she asked, concern evident. "I saw a message. From her," he said, voice tight. "Vanessa. She's trying to manipulate everything again." "I can't," he broke off, hand running through his hair in frustration. "I can't risk trusting anyone right now." Renee's expression softened, a mix of sympathy and alarm. "Jameson, this isn't about me. You're projecting her betrayal onto our relationship." "I haven't." "You don't understand," he snapped, cutting her off. "You don't know what it's like to be blindsided, to have everything you believe in torn away. I can't go through that again." His voice cracked, and for the first time, Renee saw the depth of his fear, not just of betrayal, but of opening himself fully to someone who might care. Her own voice trembled, though she tried to remain steady. "I'm not Vanessa. I'm not here to hurt you. But you're shutting me out. You're letting fear dictate your life." Jameson turned abruptly, pacing the room. "I can't. I won't risk it. I need space." The words hung heavy, a declaration of withdrawal that cut deeper than any insult. Renee's heart ached at the rejection. She had felt the spark, the trust, the possibility of something real, but it seemed to shatter in that moment. Feeling the emotional distance, Renee took a step back, forcing herself to retreat. "If that's what you need," she said softly, attempting to mask her own hurt. I'll give you space." Jameson, meanwhile, sank into the sofa, head in his hands. The warmth he had begun to feel, the budding intimacy, the laughter, the connection, was gone. He felt hollow, the walls around his heart slamming shut once more. Pride and fear had won, at least temporarily, and the quiet glow of hope was snuffed out. The following days were cold and distant. Renee honored his unspoken decree, maintaining professionalism and cordiality, but the laughter, the small touches, the shared moments of quiet, all of it vanished. Jameson buried himself in work, yet even the accolades and success of his empire felt hollow, lacking the subtle joy Renee had brought into his life. Then came the external blow, a business partner, loyal to Vanessa, leaked sensitive information to the press, framing Jameson as negligent and reckless. The media frenzy erupted, and Jameson's world, already fragile, began to crumble anew. He called Renee, panic lacing his voice. "They're destroying everything I've built. I can't manage this." Renee arrived immediately, steady as always, but the damage had been done. The combination of external chaos and internal self-doubt overwhelmed Jameson. I don't deserve this," he muttered, frustration, fear, and self-recrimination tangled in his tone. "I don't deserve you. No one does." Renee reached out, but he recoiled, eyes wet with unshed tears. "Stop," he whispered, voice breaking. "Don't. Just don't." The moment was suffocating, a final barrier to connection. Trust, painstakingly rebuilt, seemed to collapse under the weight of pride, fear, and external forces beyond their control. That night, Jameson sat alone in the penthouse, the city lights casting long shadows across the floor. The echoes of laughter and warmth from days past haunted him, highlighting the emptiness that had returned. Renee, too, retreated to her apartment, heart heavy with the knowledge that proximity and vulnerability could be so easily shattered. For both, the emotional stakes had never been higher. The spark between them remained, flickering faintly beneath layers of fear, betrayal, and misunderstanding, but it was buried beneath a mountain of doubt. Neither knew how, or if, they could find the courage to rekindle what had begun. And yet, even in the darkness, there was a quiet pulse of hope, fragile and persistent, waiting for the moment they would dare to reach for it again. The penthouse was silent, yet the air felt charged, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Jameson sat by the window, staring at the city lights, each flicker a reminder of both opportunity and loss. The storm of the past week, the betrayal, the media scandal, the emotional walls he had erected, had left him raw, stripped to the core of pride, fear, and longing. He knew Renee would arrive. She always did, patient and unwavering, yet he hesitated. Every instinct screamed to maintain the distance, to protect himself from further hurt. But somewhere deep within, a quieter voice urged him to reconsider. "Can you let this slip away?" It whispered. "Is fear stronger than hope?" Renee arrived, her presence quiet but resolute. She sensed immediately that this would not be a casual visit. "Jameson," she said softly, "we need to talk. Not about work, not about anyone else, about us." He swallowed hard, the weight of his emotions pressing against his chest. I don't know if I can," he admitted, voice low. "I've pushed everyone away for so long. I don't know if I deserve this." Her eyes, steady and unwavering, met his. "It's not about deserving," she said. "It's about choosing. Choosing to be vulnerable. Choosing to risk, even when it's scary. Choosing to see what could be, instead of what has been." Jameson's hands trembled slightly as he grasped the edge of the table, the polished wood grounding him. Memories of Vanessa's betrayal, of pain and isolation, surged, threatening to drag him back into the familiar darkness. Yet, the warmth of Renee's presence, her calm insistence, and the flicker of connection they had nurtured refused to be ignored. "I'm terrified," he admitted finally, voice raw. "Terrified of losing everything again, terrified of failing, of being hurt." Renee stepped closer, letting her hand hover near his, a gesture pregnant with meaning. "Love isn't about being fearless," she said gently. "It's about being brave enough to feel anyway. To risk, even when the outcome is uncertain." The silence that followed was thick, yet charged. Jameson closed his eyes briefly, inhaling deeply, feeling the tension in his body. Every muscle seemed to fight and surrender at once. Finally, he reached for her hand, the contact deliberate, hesitant, and yet full of intention. Renee's breath caught, a soft, hopeful sound. "Jameson," she whispered. "I choose," he said, voice stronger now, to trust. "To let this, us, exist. Even if it's terrifying. Even if it's uncertain." Her fingers intertwined with his, tentative at first, then firmer as the electricity between them pulsed through the room. The choice had been made, not a grand declaration, but a quiet, profound commitment to vulnerability, to connection, to the possibility of love. For Renee, the choice had been easier, yet no less profound. She had risked her heart, opened herself to someone wounded and wary, and now saw that courage mirrored in him. She had chosen hope over fear, presence over absence, love over retreat. Together, They moved closer, the distance that had separated them dissolved by intention and trust. The room, once filled with tension and hesitation, now held the warmth of mutual understanding. The choices had been made, and with them came liberation, the freedom to embrace connection, intimacy, and the delicate unfolding of a shared life. Later, as they stood together on the balcony, the city sprawled below, Jameson felt the first quiet peace he had known in months. The darkness of betrayal and loss still lingered, but it no longer defined him. Renee's hand in his was a promise, a testament to the power of choice, courage, and the possibility of love at last. Have you ever had to choose vulnerability over fear? Comment below, what risks have you taken for love or connection? The morning sun spilled gold across the penthouse, painting the walls in soft warmth. Jameson stood by the window, hands resting lightly on the railing, heart steady for the first time in months. The city below hummed with life, indifferent yet beautiful, and he felt a profound calm settle in his chest. Behind him, the faint clink of cups on the counter signaled Renee's presence. She approached quietly, her steps measured, carrying a tray of tea and a small bouquet of wildflowers she had picked from a nearby market. The aroma of fresh jasmine and chamomile filled the room, wrapping them in a gentle embrace of peace and intimacy. Jameson turned, catching her gaze, and for a moment, the world contracted to that single point of connection. His hand reached for hers instinctively, and this time there was no hesitation, no lingering fear, only certainty and quiet joy. "I can't believe we made it here," he murmured, voice low, but brimming with emotion. "After everything, after all the walls I built, we actually made it." Renee smiled, a radiant warmth that mirrored his own relief. "We chose each other," she said softly. "That's what mattered all along." The tension, the fear, the betrayals, they were still a part of their story, etched into the folds of memory, but they no longer held power over them. They had faced uncertainty, confronted past wounds, and made the conscious choice to embrace love. And now, in the quiet glow of morning, they felt its full promise. Jameson guided Renee to the balcony, the city stretching beneath them like a living tapestry. The breeze tousled her hair, and he tucked a stray strand behind her ear, his fingers brushing her cheek with tender familiarity. "I want you to know," he said, voice steady, "that I'll never take this for granted. You've shown me what it means to trust, to hope, to love." Renee's eyes glistened, reflecting the sunlight and her own unspoken emotions. "And you've shown me what it means to be brave," she replied. "To open myself, even when it's scary. I never want to close this chapter without living it fully, with you." The intimacy between them was effortless now, the emotional walls replaced by transparency and warmth. They laughed softly, reminiscing over small shared moments, the storm, the photograph, the long nights of cautious trust, and realized that the bond they had nurtured in moments of adversity had become stronger than either had imagined possible. Weeks later, the penthouse became a haven of celebration. A small intimate gathering welcomed them, friends, loyal staff, and a few family members, all witnesses to a love that had survived fear, betrayal, and hesitation. Jameson and Renee exchanged vows in a private ceremony, the city skyline serving as a silent, approving witness. The words spoken were simple yet profound. "I choose you," Jameson said, voice resonant with sincerity and promise. "In light and shadow, in triumph and trial." Renee smiled, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "And I choose you," she replied, "for all the days to come, in love, hope, and courage." Their hands intertwined, fingers laced as though sealing a pact not just with each other, but with life itself. The ceremony concluded with quiet applause, soft laughter, and a sense of triumph, not over others, but over their own doubts and fears. Months later, a serene Tuscan sunset bathed their private villa in gold. A small curve of a belly suggested the arrival of new life, the living embodiment of hope, continuity, and the love that had survived every test. Jameson stood beside Renee, hand resting protectively over hers, and whispered, "We built this together. All of it." She leaned against him, the gentle weight of trust and shared history anchoring her. "Yes," she whispered back, a smile curling her lips. "All of it." Evening fell, casting long shadows across the villa's terrace. They watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky painted with hues of pink, orange, and gold, a perfect mirror of their journey. Every betrayal, every fear, every choice had led them here. And in this shared stillness, they understood, love, once nurtured with patience and courage, had triumphed. What moments in life have taught you the power of choice and courage in love? Comment below, share your story and inspire others to take the leap.